Today's daf is Masechet Makkot, daf Yud Tet, 19 today, and we are on the last line of Yud Chet Amabet, continuing a discussion from our Mishnah about the prohibition of eating bikurim for someone who's not a Kohen, or a Kohen who's outside of Yerushalayim. Amar Rava bar Ada Amar Rav Yitzchak, bikurim, top line of daf Yud Tet Amud Aleph. Bikurim me'ematay mechayvin alehem. When is a person chayav for bikurim? Rashi understands this means if a zar, a non-kohen, eats them, when do they become chayav? When is it considered to be officially bikurim that belongs to a kohen? Tosfos understands, and I'm gonna bet this also refers to the other prohibition of the kohen not eating it outside of the right place. So top line of Daf Yud Tet Amud Aleph. When does bikurim become quote unquote bikurim and you're chayav on them? Mishi yiru pnei habayit. When they come into Yerushalayim, they come into the Beit HaMikdash, and they appear in front of the Beit HaMikdash, even according to this statement, before you do the reading or the placing down, anything like that. Kiman, who's that going according to? Hihaitana, it's like the following Braita, Titania, Rebbe Eliezer, Omer. Let's say, says Rebbe Eliezer, you have a very unique situation. You have Bikurim, Miksatam b'chutz, Miksatam b'fnim. You have a basket, let's say, that has, or two baskets together that have bikurim. Some of them that you're carrying are inside the walls of Yerushalayim, and some of them are, into the walls of the Beit HaMikdash, and some of them are outside the walls of the Beit HaMikdash. Says Rebbe Eliezer, shebechutz, if they're outside, they're not bikurim yet, they're chulin. And shebifnim, if they're inside, they're hektish like bikurim, and so the only thing that matters is it inside or is it outside? Now, says Rav Sheshet, Amar Rav Sheshet, this is obviously a continuation of the discussion we had yesterday, not going along the dapim, but says Rav Sheshet, bikurim hanachama kevet b'hem, that when you have bikurim and you want to know what is required for the kohen to be allowed to eat the bikurim, you have to do hanacha, which means placing it down in front of the mizbeach in the Beit HaMikdash. But kriya ema kevet b'hem, but the reading, which you're supposed to do, and we said yesterday from the Mishnah and bikurim, you have to do it in the summer up till Sukkot. You don't do it after Sukkot. But if you don't do it, that's not ma'akev. And if the kohen eats bikurim before the kriya, it's considered to be okay. Kiman. Now, which time is that going like? And we've had this a couple times already, but it's a new braita. Ki hai tana. It's a different tana. The Tanya. Rabbi Yossi Omer Shlosha Dvarim Mishim Shlosha Zakinim. Rabbi Yossi had this very famous saying where he said three different things from three different elders. We're not going to quote all of them, but one of them was Rabbi Yishmael Omer. So one of his three things was from Tana Rabbi Yishmael. And Rabbi Yishmael asked the following question, a very controversial and apt question, which is, after the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, Yachol Ya'aleh Adam Ma'aser Sheni B'zman Hazeh B'Yerushalayim. You might think, and even though the Beit HaMikdash is destroyed, sadly, we still have Kedusha in Eretz Yisrael. And if a person growing produce in Eretz Yisrael says, it's the second year of the cycle, or the first year, or the fourth year, or the fifth year, I've got to bring Ma'aser Sheni. You might think that they should nowadays take that Maaser Sheni and bring it up to Yerushalayim and eat it in Yerushalayim, even though there's no Beit HaMikdash. Now, we're going to unpack this in the Gemara, but presumably because the Kedusha of Yerushalayim remains, even though there's no Beit HaMikdash. B'dinu. And he says it seems like it's a Kal V'chomer. B'chor, well, this is the answer, sorry. The answer is a dinu. B'chor, if you have a firstborn, right, remember, a firstborn is supposed to be given to the Kohen, brought to the Beit HaMikdash, and slaughtered as a sacrifice, and eaten in the Yerushalayim. But a b'chor to un havat makom. B'chor is to be brought up to Yerushalayim, and Maaser Sheni to un havat makom. Maaser Sheni similarly needs to be brought up to Yerushalayim. Ma b'chor eino el b'fnei habayit. Just like b'chor, we know, and we'll ask you in a second how we know, but we know it's only if there's actually a Beit HaMikdash there. You can't bring a b'chor up today and sacrifice it without a Beit HaMikdash. Af Maaser eino el b'fnei habayit. So too Maaser is like b'chor, and Maaser no longer is brought to Yerushalayim when there's no Beit HaMikdash. So we do what we do today, which is you're podeh the Maaser on a coin, and you actually get rid of that coin because you can't use it. Says, well, that's not a good comparison at all. Why is Rabbi Shmuel comparing? This Rabbi Shmuel is continuing to speak, right? Why am I comparing a Bechor, a Maaser, Sheni, to Bechor? Bechor obviously is a korban. Mother Bechor shein ta'un matan damim ve'emurim megabi mizbeach. A Bechor requires you to put the blood and to put the emurim, the limbs, on the mizbeach. So how can you, and again, we're quoting this because it's going to have reference for Bikurim, but this statement of Rabbi Shmuel, which started off by saying, how do you know, or why don't you assume that we nowadays, in 2025, of course Rabbi Shmuel was not in 2025, but after the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, How do you know that you don't take Maaser Sheni that's grown in Yerushalayim, in Israel, and bring it into Yerushalayim and still eat it in the city, right? Even though the Beit HaMikdash is destroyed. So he said, well, we learned it from Bechor. Bechor, you can't do that. You have to bring Bechor to Yerushalayim, and you don't do it anymore nowadays because there is no Beit HaMikdash. So too by Maaser Sheni. Ask Rabbi Yishmael, but Bechor obviously is a Karban. So a Karban you can't do today because there's no Mizbeach. But maybe Bikurim Yochicho. I'm sorry, so maybe you should bring Maaser Sheni. Answers Rabbi Yishmael, well, Bikurim Yochicha. Bikurim are not a karban. You don't bring them on the Mizbeach, and you don't do them nowadays because there's no Beit HaMikdash. Again, these are all assumptions. We're going to see why he's making all these assumptions. Answered Rabbi Yishmael to himself, well, Ma'ale Bikurim can't be a lesson because Bikurim has Tu'unim Hanacha. You don't bring it on the Mizbeach, but you have to put it down in front of the Mizbeach. And since we don't have a Mizbeach, you can't do Bikurim. So therefore, Bechor is not a good lesson because you have to bring it on the Mizbeach. Bikurim is not a good lesson because you have to bring it in front of the Mizbeach. Therefore, says Rabbi Yishmael, how do I know then that you in fact don't bring Maaser Sheni to the Beit HaMikdash anymore, or to Yerushalayim? Talmud Lomar, because it says, it's a hekesh. It's not just a limud. It says, "V'achalta sham l'fnei Hashem Elokecha, masar degancha tiroshcha." Right, the whole pasuk we've been quoting. It's bechorot b'karcha, makish maaser lebechor. This pasuk compares by putting together maaser and bechor, and that teaches you that ma bechor eino el l'fnei habayit, af maaser eino el l'fnei habayit. That just like bechor is only done when there's a Beit HaMikdash, and when there's no more Beit HaMikdash, we don't do a Bechor. So too, Maaser is not brought to Yerushalayim nowadays when there's no longer a Beit HaMikdash. Now, we're gonna unpack this right in a second. But ask the Gemara, the point for our Mishnah is, why did Rabbi Yishmael say, Mal Bikurim that need Hanacha? Why didn't he say, V'mita, if he held that Kriya is ma'akev, Kriya of the Bikurim is required, Lifrach, he should have asked the question with the different words. He should have said, Mala Bikurim came to an in Kriya ve'anacha. That Bikurim is unique and it's different than Maaser Sheni because it requires placing it and reading, which of course you don't have to do by Maaser Sheni. So the fact that Rabbi Yishmael didn't say that makes it sound to Rav Sheshet that Kriya is not ma'akev. You're supposed to do reading by Bikurim, but you don't have to do it. You have to do the placing. So that's his proof from the Breita. Says Rav Ashi, that's not really a great proof because Nihi, you can tell me that maybe you could say, where are we up to? I'm Rav Ashi, I guess halfway down or so. Nihi, I understand what you're saying, the ikuva leka, that even if you say that you don't have to do it, mitzvah mileka, there's certainly, you can't say there's no mitzvah. The Torah says, bring your Bikurim and read and say, Hashem brought me to the land, the Rami Ovadavi, the whole nice thing. So why didn't Rabbi Yishmael say it anyways? He should have said, Lema mitzvah v'lifroch. Say, Bikurim is different because you're supposed to read, even if you don't have to read. At least that's something unique. Elam Rav Ashi, says Rav Ashi, the fact that he didn't say Kriya is not a proof that you don't have to do Kriya. The reason that Rabbi Yishmael didn't say Kriya in his question is because Kriya, although it is a mitzvah, and even maybe it's ma'akev, it's not necessary for everyone. Because kivan diika bikurei hager, right? A convert who brings bikurim, remember, part of the verse that you say is, this is the land asher nishba la'avotenu, right? The boy lemeimer, and part of the reading you say, asher nishba Hashem la'avotenu, and obviously a ger cannot say Hashem gave it to my fathers. He didn't, his fathers were not Jewish. So lo matziyamar, he can't say it, so lo psikale. So therefore, what the halacha is, now this is not really the halacha, but according to the halacha of Rav Ashi, is that you bring bikurim, you don't read the psukim because you can't. Right? So because of that, lo psikale, it's not clear. Psika means, everyone says it. So since not everyone reads, Rabbi Yishmael didn't want to quote it. Now, it's not how we pass it. In halacha, we say that a ger actually does read it, but that is one opinion in the Mishnah. So therefore, that's not a proof from Rabbi Yishmael because he didn't say the word kriya, not because it's not ma'akev, but because some parts of the Jewish people, including meaning converts, don't say the kriya. So that's the explanation for that. Now, we get back to the Breita and say, look, remember what you started off with, Rabbi Yishmael, is you asked, how do we know that you don't bring Maaser Sheni nowadays and bring it to the Beit HaMikdash or to Yerushalayim and eat it there, even though there's no Beit HaMikdash? And we said it's because we have a limud from Bechor, right? That Bechor is brought to Yerushalayim, but you don't do it nowadays because there's no Beit HaMikdash. So too, Maaser, you don't do nowadays. Then where I said, what about Bechor? It's different because it has to be brought on the Mizbeach. So he said, well, we learned it from Bikurim. Bikurim you don't bring nowadays, so too Maaser you don't bring nowadays. Answered Rabbi Shmuel, but Bikurim is different because Bikurim has to be placed in front of the Mizbeach. So it says the Gemara, well, why do we stop there and bring a pasuk? Why don't we combine the two, right? This is one of our favorite things to do, is you take Bechor and Bikurim, B'leit lahadir dina, let's go back to the discussion, V'teiti b'mahatzad, look for a commonality, and say they both are brought to Yerushalayim. Nowadays, you don't bring them, so to Maser Sheni, you don't bring nowadays. Says Gemara, because there's a commonality between them. You could have asked a question on that. Right? They are common in that although one is brought on the Mizbeach and one is placed in front of the Mizbeach, they both require the Mizbeach. And therefore, unlike Maaser Sheni, which has nothing to do with the Mizbeach, therefore you can't learn necessarily from those two things. Well, says the Gemara, I don't understand the whole Breita of Rabbi Shmuel. Because why Kasavar, right? Rabbi Shmuel makes an assumption that nowadays you can't bring a Bechor, right? And you can't bring Bikurim. But how do we know about Maaser Sheni? But why does he make that assumption? What does he hold about the current status of the Kedusha of Yerushalayim? Ika Savar. Now, if Rabbi Shmuel holds, right, which is a huge, huge question, right, that Kedusha Rishona is Kitcha L'Shata, Ve'eno Kitcha, where am I up to? Ika Savar, we are around 10 lines in the bottom. Kedusha Rishona, that the initial Kedusha of the Beit HaMikdash is, and Israel and Yerushalayim, there's a lot of different levels of Kedusha. The Kedusha Rishona is Kitcha L'Shata, for the time that the Beit HaMikdash stands, V'Kitcha L'Atilavo. And it's a kitcha atilavo. So I don't understand why does Rabbi Shmuel then say, of course, Bechor is not brought nowadays. Maybe you should bring Bechor nowadays. Afila Bechor nami. Maybe you should bring a Bechor nowadays, right? Because, as Rashi quotes from the Gemara we had in Megillah, not so recently, that if, according to that opinion, you can maybe bring Karbanot even today. You could either build a Bama or in the space where it was. Why can't you come and bring a Bechor nowadays on the Beit HaMikdash, right? So maybe why is Rabbi Shmuel saying for sure Bechor is not brought nowadays? And now if you're going to say Ika Savar Kedusha Rishona Kitcha Shatar V'lo Kitcha Latilavo, right? If Rabbi Shmuel is of the opinion that Kedusha Rishona was for the time of the Beit HaMikdash, but now that the Beit HaMikdash is destroyed, it's no longer the status of Kedusha. So then why didn't he ask the same question about Bechor? Afilu Bechor nami tibai. Why didn't he ask the same question, saying, look, you have a Bechor, it's supposed to be brought to Yerushalayim, but Yerushalayim is no longer have the Kedusha of Karbanot. What do you do with the Bechor? Maybe you bring it up, maybe you don't bring it up. Meaning, why is it more obvious to him that Bechor than Ma'aser Sheni? Says Ravina, the reason is, the Olam, what Rabbi Shmuel holds, is Kasavar Kitcha L'Shata V'lo Kitcha Latilavo. You know, in fact, Rabbi Yishmael holds that the Kedusha of Yerushalayim is for the time that there's a Beit HaMikdash. When there's no longer Beit HaMikdash, like today, sadly, there is no Kedusha, or not the same level of Kedusha on the place. So, of course, you can't bring a Bechor. So, just like you shouldn't bring Maser Sheni, you can't bring Bechor. But Hacha, we're talking about a very unique case of a Bechor, Shenizrak Damo Kodem Chorban Habayit. That basically you already did the Bechor. Meaning you brought your Bechor, again, this is obviously a very unusual case, that you brought your Bechor to the Beit HaMikdash, you shechted the Bechor, you poured the blood on the Mizbeach, you burned the parts on the Mizbeach, and now you're supposed to eat your Bechor tonight, let's say. Unfortunately, the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. The Charav Habayit, the Beit HaMikdash has now been destroyed on Tisha B'Av, V'adayin B'saro Kayam. You have your meat. So therefore, says Rabbi Yishmael, just like you can't eat that meat, even though you already took care of the Bechor, you already did everything with Beit HaMikdash, but you can't eat the meat. So, same too, you can't eat your Maser Sheni, which of course has nothing to do with the Mizbeach, but has to be brought to Yerushalayim. So that was his nima, that even meat that was properly done on the Mizbeach before the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed can for sure not be eaten today after the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. So too by Maser Sheni. Now, why is it so obvious to Rabbi Shmuel that you can't eat that meat? Maybe you can eat the meat. It was done properly. And the reason is makshinan bisaro ledamo, because we definitely compare the meat of the Bechor to the blood of the Bechor. Just like the blood of the Bechor, by definition, needs the Mizbeach, because you have to put it on the Mizbeach. Now, you already did that here. So to the basar, the meat of the Bechor needs to be done on the Mizbeach, and therefore, not on the Mizbeach, but when there is a Mizbeach. And so therefore, if nowadays there is no Mizbeach, which there isn't after the Chorban HaBayit, then even though you already have a bechar, that you did the zrika, you did the burning properly, the fact that there's no mizbech means you can't eat the meat, and that's for sure, according to Rabbi Shmuel. The question then is, do you apply that to maaser? And what he wanted to say was, makish maaser the bechar. Let's now apply maaser to bechar. And then we asked the question and said, well, maaser is different because bechar needs a mizbeach. So that was the whole braita. Says the Gemara, Ravina, that's a nice explanation. But the problem I have with that, 2 lines from the bottom of Daf Yud Tet Amud Aleph, is if that's really the case, that the only way that Rabbi Shmuel knows that the meat of the Bechar can't be eaten is from the blood of the Bechar, then how could he go ahead and learn from there that the produce of Maaser Sheni cannot be eaten? That's a second level limud, right? Is it possible, and this is only a halacha by kachim, like we had similar yesterday, we talked about, that by kachim, you can't learn one thing, B from A, and then C from B. You're not allowed to do chains of learning by kachim. So if you know the meat of a bechar from the blood of a bechar, that's B from A, you can't then learn out maaser, which is C, from B in kachim. Answers the Gemara, well, it's not kachim, because we're talking about maaser. Maaser is not kachim, bechar is kachim. But maaser dagan chulanu. Maaser of grain is totally chulan. You don't need to be a kohen, you don't need to be anything to eat maaser sheni. You just need to bring it to Yerushalayim. So therefore, because the C in this case, which is maaser, is chulin, you can learn it out from B, which is kachim, even though you already learned B out from A, which is one kachim from another kachim. Says the Gemara, well, that's a little controversial. Hanicha lamandamar, turn the page to Daf Yoter Amabad. Hanicha, this makes sense going to the mandamar, batar lameidas lina, that you go after the thing that is learned, meaning the C in this case, maaser, which is chulin, and therefore you can learn lamad min halamad. El lamandamar batar min lameidas lina, and according to the mandamar, this is machloket we're going to have, that you go after the teaching thing, meaning B, if B is teaching to C, and basically you say, if B is about kachim, it can't teach us about C. So then Bechor can't teach us about Maaser, because Bechor meat is learned from Bechor dam. So A is dam and B is meat. And then you can't learn from there to Maaser. So Ma'ikal and Meimar. Answers Gemara, well, that would be true if they were different. But dam ubasar chada milti. It's not really like we're learning B from A when we say we learn blood from the flesh from the blood. They're really the same thing, meaning it's just basically saying treat this animal like one thing, just like the blood is treated this way, the basar is treated this way, but it's not actually a derivation, right? Just like we know by blood, we know by basar. We're basically saying it's one thing, it's one animal. The same way you can't bring the blood without a mizbeach, because by definition you can't do that. We say you can't eat the meat without a mizbeach. That's one limud, and we learn from there to Maaser Sheni that you can't eat Maaser Sheni in Yerushalayim. Nowadays, you have to just be poded and eat the food, and we let the money go to waste or rot. So that is the explanation for Maaser Sheni. Okay, continues the Gemara now. Finally, we're at 2 dots. We're off. We finished Bechor for now, at least, and Bikurim, sorry. And we're up to the next case in the Mishnah, which said Kadshe Kachim, right? The Mishnah said that if you eat Kadshe Kachim outside of the Beit HaMikdash, remember Kadshe Kachim, we're supposed to be eating in the Beit HaMikdash. You eat them outside the Beit HaMikdash, you get Makkot. And then we continued, we're not talking about that case. The next case in the Mishnah was if you ate Maaser Sheni outside of Yerushalayim, that you also get Makkot. Maaser Sheni has to be in Yerushalayim, and if you eat it outside Yerushalayim, you get Makkot. Says Gemara, we had that in the previous Mishnah as well. Tanina Chadazimna, we already learned in a Mishnah that if you eat Maaser Sheni outside Yerushalayim, you get Makkot. Where did we learn that? The first Mishnah that we talked about with the list of Makkot said, Maaser Sheni v'hekdesh lo niftu. If you take Maaser Sheni and hekdesh and you don't redeem it, now we assume, right, that what that means is that you didn't redeem it and you ate it outside of Yerushalayim, right? Because remember, you're supposed to take Maaser Sheni, bring it up to Yerushalayim and eat it in Yerushalayim. You don't have to redeem it. If you're going to take it out of Yerushalayim, then you have to redeem the Maaser Sheni onto money, right? Use the money for Maaser Sheni, and then you can eat the produce. So we think when it says Maaser Sheni Shalom Niftu, it means you ate Maaser Sheni outside Yerushalayim. So it's the same thing in our Mishnah. Why would you have to say it twice? Amr Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, says Rabbi Chanina, there are 2 different cases. There's one case is Seifa, meaning the second Mishnah, is b'Maaser Sheni Tahor. where actually the Maaser Sheni is tahar, so you're supposed to eat in Yerushalayim, and Gavra tahar, and the person is tahar, and he ate it ka'achale chutz l'choma. He just took it. He said, it's too crowded in Yerushalayim. I couldn't find a nice restaurant. He goes out to whatever cities outside Yerushalayim, to Tel Aviv, and eats it there. So that is a prohibition of eating Maaser Sheni outside Yerushalayim. The ka'achal chutz l'choma. The prohibition is eating outside the wall. What's the reisha? The case in the Reisha where we said Maaser Sheni Lo Niftu is not where Lo Niftu and you ate it outside Yerushalayim. It's referring to Maaser it's referring to in Reisha the Maaser Sheni Tamei. The point in the Reisha is that the Maaser Sheni is Tamei and the Gavra is Tamei, the person, or it could be or, but let's just say, and the person is Tamei. And therefore, now you're not supposed to eat Maaser Sheni that's Tamei. What are you supposed to do with Maaser Sheni that's Tamei? You're supposed to redeem it onto money, then take the money and buy something tar or wait till you're tar, right? But you didn't do that. And instead, ka'achale b'Yerushalayim, you ate it in Yerushalayim. So it's not the first Mishnah, which was confusing because it just said Maaser Sheni, which wasn't redeemed. And the simple reading is, well, you ate your Maaser Sheni without going to Yerushalayim. But that's not what it means. What it means is it's Maaser Sheni, which you were supposed to redeem because either you're tamei, so you can't eat it, or the Maaser Sheni is tamei, so you can't eat it. You're supposed to exchange it for money and either wait time till you're tahar or buy something tahar. And you didn't, you ate it bituma. So the Mishnah is teaching you that if you eat Maaser Sheni in Yerushalayim, bituma, you're chayiv Makkot. Ask him, how do you know that? Minalan d'mechayiv ala mishum tuma. How do you know, right? We for sure know because the pasuk says that you can't eat Maaser Sheni outside Yerushalayim. But how do you know that if you eat it when it's tamei, that you're chayiv lo taseh as well? The Tanya, this is based on the following braita. Rabbi Shimon analyzes the psukim. Remember that at the end of every 3 years or so, you get up and you say vidui maaser, right? You say I didn't do anything wrong, I didn't do it inappropriately, I didn't, etc. And one of the things you say is lo bi'arti mimenu bitamei. I was not bi'arti, which means I didn't get rid of it or consume it or eat it, bitumah, right? But because you say the language lo bi'arti mimeni bitamei, but we learn basically, and we'll see, we're going to go into this a little bit more, but we learn from there that it means any context of tumah, meaning, says the Gemara, vein shani tamei v'hu tahor, whether the person is tamei and the food was tahor, or vein shani tahor, the person was tahor v'hu tamei, that whether the person was tahor and the food was tamei, that's how you know you're not allowed to eat it, right? So that is how we know that you're not supposed to have it bitumah, because you basically say, lo biarti meno bitamei, I didn't get rid of it bitumah anyway. Well, says Rabbi Shimon, this continues the Braita, v'heichon musar al achila ini yodea. But where the Torah specifically says that you can't eat it, that meaning, although it says you're not allowed to, although it says that I didn't do it, lo b'arti meno b'tamei, I don't know where the Torah said don't do that, right? I know where the person's saying I didn't do that thing that's wrong, but where did the Torah say don't do this thing? Heichan muzhar, where's the azhara? I don't know. Says, what do you mean you don't know? It's pretty clear. Tumat guf, if the person is tamei, then behedya k'tivbei. The Torah it specifically says nefesh asher tiga bo. A person who touched, right, it's a pasuk in we're going to have, very shortly, about Tumah and Vayikra. A nefesh asher tigabo, a person who touches something who's tamei, right, a sheretz, v'tama ad ha'erev, they become tamei until the evening, v'lo yochal min ha'kadashim, and they're not allowed to eat things that are holy, right, which includes maaser. So I know for sure that a person who is tamei is not allowed to eat until they go to the mikvah and they have harav shemesh, but during that time, they can't eat it. Ella, the question that Rabbi Shimon had, was it Rabbi Shimon? The question Rabbi Shimon had, was tumat atzmo minayin. How do you know that there's a prohibition of not eating maaser sheni if the maaser sheni is tamei, right? How do you know that? So the answer, says the Gemara, is dichtiv, because the pasuk says, lo tuchal lechol b'sha'arecha, right? It's pasuk we quoted 100 times, right? You can't eat I didn't eat in my tents, don't eat in your tents. And continues, masar tigancha, tiroshcha, yitzarecha, masar from your grain and your tirosh, which is your wine, and your yitzar and your grapes, etc. Now, what does that mean? I didn't eat it, don't eat it b'sha'arecha. It sounds a lot like you didn't eat it outside Yerushalayim. However, Lahalan omer, but elsewhere we says bisharecha tochlenu. This is referring to an animal that's not a korban, right? You can eat an animal that's a bechor that got a mum, so it's not kachim. You can eat it tamei v'hatahar. You can eat it tamei and tahar. So you see that bisharecha refers to eating things that are tamei, right? And so therefore, Tanya Dver Rabbi Shmuel said about bechor that afilu tamei v'tahar ochlim b'karachat ve'in choshishim. Right, that by a bechor that has a mum, so it's not a korban, you can eat it even if one person is tamei, one person is tahar. There's a piece that's tamei, and there's a piece that's tahar. It doesn't matter. But kamar Rachmanan, the Torah is then coming to tell you that by a bechor that has a mum, so it's not kachim, you can eat it if it's tamei. But by maaser sheni, you can't eat it if it's tamei. Kamar Rachmana heich tamei deshari lach gabi tahar hatam. The thing that's tamei, meaning the food that's tamei, that we permitted you if it's a bechor and it's not kachim. So with the tahar person there, meaning they're in an animal that's not korban, hacha here by maaser sheni lo techal. Here you should not eat it. So that's how we derive that which is permitted atamei v'atar yachdav, right? Right, that you can eat it together. Sorry, b'sharecha tochlenu atamei v'atahar. There, that's permitted in that case, but prohibited by Maaser Sheni, where it says lo tuchal lechol b'sharecha. So what you eat in the gates there, which is tamei food, you cannot eat in the gates here, meaning you cannot eat tamei Maaser Sheni. And so that is how we know that if the person is tamei, you can't eat it, and if the Maaser Sheni is tamei, you can't eat it. And that's why our Mishnah said that if you eat Maaser Sheni, that was not podeh, meaning it was tamei or you're tamei, but you didn't do the right thing and be podeh, you ate it, then you get a lotasei and you get Makkot. That's one group. Another group of Maaser Sheni is if you eat it outside of Yerushalayim. So that is how we understand the Mishnah. Now says the Gemara, but you made a very interesting assumption here, which is that it's only if you eat Maaser Sheni, which is tamei, that was not redeemed, that was not put like shelo niftu. How do you even know you can redeem it? Minalan the bar pidiyahu. How do you know that you can redeem? Meaning, let's say you have Maaser Sheni, it becomes tamei. Maybe it's off limits. You can never use it again. It's tamei. You let it rot, like many other korbanot like that become tamei. But you can't do anything about it. How do you know that you can still redeem it? We're going to see in a second that's even in Yerushalayim. But remember, usually you have Maaser Sheni in your neighborhood, in the Gvulin, you can redeem it. But once you bring it to Yerushalayim, you can no longer convert your Maaser Sheni into money because you're already in the city of Yerushalayim. How do we know that if it's tamei, you can, even in Yerushalayim? Minan debar pediyahu, Damar Rabbi Elazar, that's from the statement, the Braita of Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar said, Minayin l'maaser sheni, where are we up to? I'd say around halfway down the daf, right? Minayin l'maaser sheni shenitzma. How do you know that if you have maaser sheni that became tamei, shepodin oto afilu b'Yerushalayim, that you can be podeh in general, and even if you're already in Yerushalayim, Talmud Lomer, it's based on a very interesting reading of the pasuk. The pasuk says by maaser sheni, right, that if you cannot carry it, kilo tuchal seito. Now, seit usually means a load, right? You can't. It's just too much, right? You don't have the ability to. Let's say you have bushels and bushels of grain. It's too much to hire a truck and bring it to Yerushalayim, right? So you can't bring it. You therefore are podeh. But we're darshaning, says Rabbi Elazar, sorry, that the word seito does not just mean a load, a carrying thing, because it would have just said that word. It means you can't eat it. Ve'ein seit el achila. The word seit also is used to refer to achila, as it says by Yosef, shenemar, vayisa masaot meit panav. Yosef gave them masaot, which means food to eat, right? It was bundles of food, right? It was the famine, but he gave them food. So when it says in the Torah, kilo tuchal seito, it's saying you can be podeh your maaser sheni because you're unable to eat it. Now, of course, one reason you would be unable to eat it is because you're not in Yerushalayim. But another reason you're unable to eat it is even if you are in Yerushalayim, but it's tamei. So because you can't eat it, you're allowed to redeem it. So that is how we learn out that you can be podeh maaser sheni that's tamei, even in Yerushalayim. Doesn't matter where you are. Amar of Bibi, Amar of Asi. Says Rav Bibi, Amar of Asi, a continuation of this principle, is minayin the maaser sheni tahor. Now, let's say you have maaser sheni, it's tahar. There's no special dispensation for being tamei. It's a regular, good old maaser sheni. and you're supposed to be podeh your Maaser Sheni in your house before you go to Yerushalayim, but you didn't, right? And how do we know about Maaser Sheni that is tahar, that you're on your way to Yerushalayim to podino to afilu b'psiya achat chutz l'choma, even if you're 90% of the way to Yerushalayim or one step outside of the wall, and you say, you know what? I think we're going to get there too late tonight. I don't think we're going to have time to cook and eat it. Let's stop now and eat it and be poded on money. You're 20 feet away. How do you know that that's permitted? Shenemar, it's also based on this pasuk because it says, "Kilo tuchal seito." You're unable. Here we're dashing from the opposite, from the fact that you can't carry it, meaning you physically are outside Yerushalayim, and therefore you can still be podeh. Ask the Gemara, well, how can you use the pasuk "Kilo tuchal seito" to tell me that as long as you have to carry it, you can be podeh? We just used it to tell you when you can't eat it, you can be podeh. Hami bailei could Rabbi Elazar. Says the Gemara, well, we can learn both. Because in Cain, if it was just for Rebbe Lazar, that it meant you can't eat it, you're unable to eat it. Why use a funny word for eating of seito? My seito, to tell you that it also means you couldn't carry it. So maybe the whole pasuk is telling you that you can't carry it. In Cain, use the word litol, which is a much more regular word for carrying. My seito, why use this unusual word which can imply both carrying and a load and food? Shmamina tarti. Do you see that there's basically two circumstances that would allow you to redeem your Maaser Sheni? One is if you physically can't or don't have it inside Yerushalayim, so you can't carry it for whatever reason, even if you're 5 feet away, and this or one step away, psiachat. And the second is if you can't eat it because it's tamei or you're tamei, even if you're in Yerushalayim. In both cases, you can be podeh Maaser Sheni on money. The money has the kedusha. You use the money to buy more food. Okay. Continues the Gemara. What are we up to? How many lines in the bottom? 3 lines from the last narrow line. So this is a very, very interesting Gemara. And the Gemara says the following. Yativ Rav Chanina Rav Hoshaya. Now, there's different girsaot here. So the girsa that I'm going to read, which is from the Bach, if you look on the, I don't know if you have it on the right in your Gemara, the Bach changes this to they were sitting, and then he takes the next words out, and says, Apitra Yerushalayim. They were physically sitting. So basically, we're telling you, this is a very clever and nice thing, that they were sitting at the gates of Yerushalayim and learning, right? Becoming boile, and they asked the following question, right? Now, the gears in front of us is that they were sitting wherever they were sitting, and their question was, Apitra Yerushalayim mahu. Right? If the Maaser Sheni is on the gateway of Yerushalayim, you're right there on the line for customs, can you still be podeh? Right? So that's a little bit of a difference in whether they were sitting there and saying this, or they were saying, what if the food was there? But that's basically the question. The question, regardless, is what if you're very, very close to Yerushalayim? So mahu. So what's the halacha? So it says in our pshita, it's obvious to them, to Rav Chanina and Rav Hoshaya, the last narrow line, that if who bechutz, the person is standing outside Yerushalayim, but his suitcase, right? He's pushing a cart, and the cart is inside the walls of Yerushalayim. That's considered to be in Yerushalayim. The fact that you're outside, kalto mechitzot, the walls of Yerushalayim, the boundaries of Yerushalayim absorb that food. It's Maaser Sheni. It's in the walls. If you then take it back out, you can't redeem it. You can't eat it. Unless it's tamei, etc. But what about hu bifnim umaso bechutz? What if the person comes into Yerushalayim and he's dragging behind him his roller suitcase, right? And it's not in the walls yet. And then something happens, he changes his mind, he goes back outside. Is the food considered to be in Yerushalayim because the person pulling it is in Yerushalayim or not? Mahu. So that was the case that Rav Chanina and Rav Hoshaya were curious about. So Tarlu Saba b'Deber Shimon ben Yochai. There was one old person. We always like our old people in the Gemara. Saba said, I have a braita that I learned from Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai that says the following. It says in the pasuk, Hirchak mimcha makom, if the place is too far away from you, and therefore you can be podeh your Maaser Sheni, that we learn from that pasuk, mimcha means mimilu echa. Mimcha means from your entire fullness, meaning your whole you, meaning all of you, right? So that therefore, it only means if all of you is away from Yerushalayim, but if part of you went into Yerushalayim, So meaning you are walking into Yerushalayim, pulling a suitcase or carrying a load, and you walked in, but the load didn't walk in, then you're not considered to be far away, and therefore you cannot be podeh. Okay, so this is a very interesting drasha of Shimon Bar Yochai from the word mimcha, that any part of you that comes into Yerushalayim would invalidate basically this Maaser Sheni from being outside of Yerushalayim, and you can no longer be podeh. Spoiler of Papa, now ask Rav Papa, as Rav Papa loves to do, right? What about if you're not pulling your suitcase or pulling your load, but nakale bekanya? Let's say you've got a reed and you're holding on to it, which the point of a reed is that it could be, 20 feet behind you. Is that considered to be part of you, or is that considered to be not part of you? My take on this is of the, fun question to keep you awake, but we don't have a very clear answer to whether or not, what's the distance, right? You're coming in, it's right behind you. If it's very far behind you, we don't really know exactly what is included, but we know that if it's next to you, then according to Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, it would be chayev in Maaser Sheni already, or it's already Maaser Sheni, and you can't redeem it. Continues the Gemara now, around 5 lines from the bottom. Amr Basi, Amr Yochanan, Maaser Sheni me'ematai chayavin alav. Now, we've said this before, right? When is a person chayav for Makkot? Remember, the Maaser Sheni, once you bring it to Yerushalayim, if you eat it outside Yerushalayim, or you eat it b'tumah, you get Makkot. When is that time? That is Mishara Pnei Choma. Once the Maaser Sheni, this is different than redeeming it, right? This is when the Maaser Sheni sees the wall, which means comes inside the wall, right? So Bara Pnei Choma does not mean you're 20 feet away and you see the wall. It means when you've come into the wall. My time, how do we know that? The pasuk says, "If Hashem Elokecha tuchlena," it says, "Eat the Maaser Sheni in front of Hashem," right? We take out the word Shana, but Shana, it's not relevant for this. And it says in another pasuk in Dvarim, where am I? Lo tuchal le'echol b'sharecha, right? Don't eat it in your sharecha. So kol hecha de karina be lifnei Hashem Elokecha tuchlena. Wherever it says you can eat it in front of Hashem, which means you're inside the walls of Yerushalayim, then karina be. Then we apply the negative commandment of lo tuchal le'echol b'sharecha. Don't eat it outside in your home, and then if you do eat it outside, you get makot. But as long as you can't fulfill the mitzvah, the positive mitzvah of eating in front of Hashem, meaning you haven't gone inside yet, then then we don't apply the lo taseh of don't eat it outside of the Beit HaMikdash. So that is the last statement. The question the Gemara asks, I think we're gonna. I think I'm going to stop here actually. So there's going to be a Braita now because it's a fascinating case, a very interesting case of 3 lines from the bottom, right? Rabbi Yossi, of a case where basically a Kohen is holding on to a fig that has not yet had Truma or Maaser taken from it, and he pops it into his mouth and he eats it. And the question we're going to have tomorrow is it's an Isra of Tevel. There's other Isurim depending on what you take. There's what's called Tevel Maaser Rishon. There's Maaser Sheni. So we're going to discuss, we love our lists of lo tases. So tomorrow we're going to get into a list of lo tases and discuss a little bit more about when exactly the Isser of Maaser Sheni starts on an object in relation to bringing it into Yerushalayim. What we just said today is that the Isurim are connected. Torah says, eat it in your gates. That's right, don't eat it in your gates. Lo tuchal le'echol b'sharecha. Eat it in front of Hashem, right? So the positive commandment is eat in front of Hashem, which means in Yerushalayim. And we learn from there that the lo taseh of Makkot would only apply if you could have eaten in Yerushalayim and you're eating it outside. Meaning, you brought it to Yerushalayim, it was chayav, and then you walked outside and ate it outside. But if you actually ate it without going to Yerushalayim, you'd be prohibited because you were against the mitzvah aseh of not eating it, of eating it in your gates, right? The mitzvah taseh of eating it in front of Hashem, but you would not be chayav a lo taseh of getting makot because you never entered Yerushalayim. But we'll continue this, not me, but we'll continue tomorrow morning.
But you're allowed to pull that outside Yerushalayim on a coin. You are allowed to do so.
Correct. You have to do so. Yeah, or you can't have to, but yes, you're allowed to do so.
So you're definitely allowed to eat it as long as you mafted at the ochel on the coin.
No, the question we're talking about, let's say you were not podeh and you ate it inappropriately, but you're outside Yerushalayim. So what we're saying now is that there's no lota. You will not get makot for that. You only get makot if you brought the Maaser Sheni into Yerushalayim, it got the kedusha, let's say, and then you walked outside and ate it outside. But if you ate it before getting to Yerushalayim, you would be over naseh, because the aseh does say Lifnei Hashem Elokecha Tochleinu. It's a positive commandment. Bring it in front of God and eat it. You didn't do that. But you would not be over a lo taseh and you wouldn't get makot because of that lo taseh.
And when you enter Yerushalayim, you don't have to podeh. You just eat it.
Right, but if you walk outside and eat it, that's
it's a separate. But once you're there, you don't have to podeh. You can.
Correct. Then you're fulfilling many mitzvot by eating it right there. Correct. Unless, as we said earlier, it becomes tamei, and then in case you gotta be podeh. Okay, Shavua Tov, everyone.
Shavua Tov.
I'll send some messages about next week, which will be complicated again. But we'll 1 week at a time.
I won't be here.
Okay. Where are you going to be, Miriam?
I'm going to Paris tonight.
Paris. Got it. Okay. Have a safe trip.
Thank you.
Chodesh Tov tonight for everyone, and we'll
Chodesh Tov.
see some of you next week, I hope. Shavua Tov.
Bye.